Okay, so first let's define some terms. So different types of advisors. You can either be independent or captive. Independent, you're able to use all of the different tools, you're able to use all of the different companies that exist to create a solution for your client. A captive advisor can only use the tools that their particular company offers, so they're very limited in their approach. Right? By the very nature of what they're doing, they have one arm tied behind their back. And the analogy I use is if you were drowning, would you want somebody to save you that has one arm tied behind their back, or would you want both arms? So an independent advisor has both arms. They have the ability to use all the tools in the toolbox. If we were to use a carpenter analogy, when you're building a house, do you want access to all of the different tools? Or do you want only a hammer? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's one of the major problems in our industry, in the fundamentally flawed sales industry that finance is that you have a lot of captive people out there that only have access to hammers, so everything looks like a nail to them. And as a result of that, people are not getting the advice that they need. Okay? So that's independent versus captive. So as an independent advisory office, we don't just have access to all the hammers, we have access to all the Phillips head screwdrivers, we have access to all of the wrenches. We have access to everything. And the key is to use the combination of those tools in a way that builds the house in the best possible way, right? So a fiduciary. There are two different standards of care. There's suitability, which is a very low bar, and fiduciary, which legally obligates the advisory team or the advisor to put the client's interests ahead of the advisor's interests, which you would think would be obvious, but in the fundamentally flawed sales system that exists, that is not so obvious. And very small percentage of advisors are actually fiduciaries. We are a fiduciary. So let's use the same carpenter analogy. We have access to all the tools, we're independent. We're going to use those tools with the same care and attention as if we were creating the house, building the house for ourselves. So you can really only be a fiduciary if you are independent, right? And then if you want to take it one step further, and there's a separate video on our 3-bucket approach, but if you want to take it one step further, from a philosophical level, from a planning perspective level, you have to be independent in your thought process. You have to really be working with planners that don't love or hate any specific tool. You almost have to be agnostic to the tool and look at the tool as something that does what it does very well and is used in particular circumstances. Because if you have your own opinions as an advisor about this tool is great or this tool stinks, then that bias is going to be brought into the planning room. So to have an independent philosophy as well and say, hey, you know, there is a use case for this tool, and in this very specific situation, there is a value to use this tool, is very important for the client. Because there is no tool that is wonderful and there is no tool that is bad. The only question is whether or not the tool is the perfect tool for the job or a terrible tool for the job. But unless you're working with somebody who's independent, they don't have access to the tools in the first place. And unless you're working with a fiduciary, they don't care whether or not the job gets done. And that's the value.